November 1990. The night was heavy with fog, the kind that made the street lights bleed pale halos into the darkness. London in late November had an unforgiving chill, and the damp air seeped into Amelia Hart's thin coat as she made her way home. She was late, again. Benny's cafe had been busier than usual, and Amelia had stayed to help her co-worker Jenny clean up. The streets were quieter than usual, the fog muffling the usual city noises of car engines and distant chatter. Amelia was just 17, with a lively spark that drew people to her. She was known for her warm hazel eyes, her auburn hair often pulled into a messy bun, and the notebook she always carried. That notebook held her world, half-finished poems, observations about strangers in the cafe, the sketches of places she dreamed of visiting. Tonight it was tucked safely under her arm, alongside a borrowed copy of Emily Dickinson's poetry. She walked briskly, her boots clinging against the cobblestones. Her flat wasn't far, but she had decided to take the shortcut through Barrow Lane. It wasn't the safest route, but it shaved 10 minutes off her journey. Besides, Amelia had walked this path countless times before, and felt she knew it like the back of her hand. The man who called himself Ezekiel had long since abandoned his given name. To him, his birth name was meaningless, a relic of a life he had deliberately left behind. Ezekiel, a name he believed imbued him with a sense of divine purpose, was the only identity he needed. By day, he was invisible, an unremarkable figure blending seamlessly into the bustling city. A man who might have been a clerk, a laborer, or even a customer at Benny's cafe, unnoticed and unmemorable. By night, however, he became something entirely different, a predator cloaked in darkness, and driven by a compulsion he could neither understand nor resist. Ezekiel's mind was a labyrinth of contradictions. He saw himself as a messenger carrying out what he believed to be an ordained mission. Each victim was carefully chosen, their lives studied with an almost academic precision. To Ezekiel, the act of taking a life was not random chaos, but a deliberate act of control, a dark and twisted form of art. He planned his every move with the precision of a chess master, thinking several steps ahead to ensure there would be no mistakes. He thrived on anonymity, the satisfaction of knowing that no one ever saw him coming, and no one ever saw him leave. The fog was his ally, masking his presence and muffling the sounds of his movements. His tools were chosen with care: a length of piano wire, gloves to leave no fingerprints, and a small vial of chloroform for emergencies. But Ezekiel rarely needed to use the chloroform. He preferred silence, the eerie stillness of a life ending without a sound. He had honed his methods for over years, learning from every encounter. For him, each kill was a performance, and he was both the director and the star. Amelia had caught his attention weeks ago. Her routine was predictable: the late shifts at Benny's, the quiet walks home, the detour through Barrow Lane. He had watched her from afar, studying her movements, her habits, even the way she scribbled furiously in her notebook during breaks. There was something about her, a spark of life, an energy that intrigued him. He told himself it was her vitality that made her perfect target, so deep down he didn't fully understand why she had become the focus of his fixation. On the night of November 12th, as she lingered at the cafe longer than usual, Ezekiel waited patiently in the shadows. His dark coat and hat rendered him nearly invisible in the thick fog. He knew every twist and turn of Barrow Lane, every dimly lit corner and blind spot. He had walked the route himself many times, mentally mapping the places he could strike without being seen. When Amelia finally stepped outside and began her walk home, he followed at a careful distance, his footsteps muffled by the fog and the cobblestones. As Amelia turned into Barrow Lane, the fog thickened, swallowing the faint glow of the street lamps. The alley was narrow, lined with tall brick walls and the occasional overflowing bin. She always thought it looked like something out of a Victorian novel, romantic in daylight, but foreboding after dark. Her steps echoed in the stillness, and she hugged her notebook tighter. A sound behind her made her pause. It was faint, like the rustle of fabric. She glanced back, and the alley was empty, the fog obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Shaking her head, she muttered, "Get a grip, Amelia." She quickened her pace. The sound came again, louder this time. Footsteps. Her heart began to race as she turned sharply. "Hello? Is someone there?" Her voice wavered, swallowed by the fog. Silence. Then he struck. Ezekiel moved with practiced ease, slipping the piano wire over her head before she could scream. The thin metal dug into her throat as he pulled it taut, dragging her back into the shadows. Her notebook and bag fell to the ground with a dull thud, scattering their contents across the cobblestones. Amelia's hands flew to her neck, clawing at the wire as she gasped for air. Her nails scraped against Ezekiel's gloves, but his grip was unyielding. He pinned her against the wall, his voice a cold whisper in her ear. "Shh, it will be over soon." She kicked and twisted, her strength fading as the wire bit deeper, her vision blurred, tears streaming down her cheeks. The world around her dimmed until there was nothing but darkness. Ezekiel lowered her lifeless body to the ground, carefully removing the wire and wiping it clean. He studied her face for a moment, tilting his head as if admiring a painting. In the dim light, she looked almost serene. Rifling through her bag, he found her notebook. Curious, he flipped through the pages, pausing on a poem she had written about the stars. For a brief moment, he felt something. Not guilt, but an unsettling admiration. Amelia's words had a beauty he hadn't expected. He placed the notebook beside her body and disappeared into the fog, his footsteps fading into the silence. By the time sun rose, there was no trace of him, only the scattered belongings of a young girl who had vanished into the night. Amelia's body was found the next morning by a street sweeper. Her death sent shock waves through the community. The police were baffled. There were no witnesses, no evidence, and no clear motive. Amelia was the fog phantom's fourth victim, and the connection between the murders wouldn't be made until months later. Her family was left shattered, clinging to her notebook as a final piece of her. The half-finished poems became a heartbreaking reminder of a life cut short, a glimpse into her dreams she would never realize. One page in particular stood out. Beneath the fog, the silence cries, a fleeting shadow where hope dies. But even in the darkest night, the stars above still hold their light. Ezekiel continued his dark mission, evading capture with an almost supernatural skill. The fog phantom's crimes became the stuff of legend, whispered about in hushed tones and chronicled in true crime books. But for those who knew Amelia, a story was more than a cautionary tale. It was a reminder of a bright soul extinguished too soon. Her poems, published posthumously, inspired readers across London. Her words a light in the darkness she had feared too late. But the fog phantom's shadow lingered, a chilling reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved.